Hi, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today is going to be an outstanding show because we're going to talk about eating disorders and the impact that it has on an individual. And when we say the impact that it has on individuals, we're talking about this is a eating disorder, so it can affect all kind of things growing up, from peer pressure to hormones to relationships, you name it. It can cause some pretty significant turmoil. With that said, during this pre-interview, I had a chance to really sit down and get inside the true depths of what this actually means. Because when you hear eating disorder, you probably just say, oh, that person just likes chocolate chip cookies and all that. But it goes deeper, and I was privileged to be educated in it. And it's an old saying, experience is the best teacher. With that said, I am pleased to have on the show a young lady that suffered from all phases of eating disorders, but there's a happy ending at the end. Welcome to the show, Julie Holland. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you so much, Andre. Thank you for having me.
Let's get right down to it. Tell the viewers a little bit about who Julie Holland is.
Well, that's a loaded question right there. Who Julie Holland is. I mean, I think, with the focus of the show today about eating disorders, I mean, so much of my life, I suffered from an eating disorder. It started at age 7. My dad went to Vietnam. I'm an Army brat, born at Fort Benning, grew up in Georgia. And my dad went to Vietnam, and the way that my mom managed his being away was by cooking, and the way that I dealt with my dad being away was through eating. So needless to say, by the time my dad came back from Vietnam, 1.5 to 2 years later, I had almost tripled my weight. And I remember, one of the first, most of my early memories are centered around food. But I do remember my dad coming off the plane, and I was so excited to see him. And he tried to pick me up, and he did pick me up, but he was like, "Oh, would you look at my little tank?" And, for me as a little girl who had not seen her dad in 1.5 years, I felt immediately, oh my gosh, he thinks I'm ugly.
Right.
Though the reality was a tank was a very positive thing in my dad's life.
Right.
It's what kept him safe. But, that's really how my eating disorder started. And, when you ask who is Julie Holland, I think that part of my life really developed, helped to create who I am today. And I learned a lot of coping mechanisms. I learned to watch more than listen.
Right.
There was a lot that I learned as a young child that today I've taken with me. But, I think today how I would describe Julie Holland is that I'm a mom. I'm an executive in the healthcare field. I'm an advocate. And I'm a woman who likes to do lots of different things, but most importantly, I really like to have an impact on others' lives.
Let's go back for a minute, because you mentioned a key word here, a coping mechanism. What was it like in your household? Because when you say words like coping, there had to be something that you had to readjust your thought process, the way you approach life. And let's go back a little bit. What was it like in your household with mom, dads, your siblings? Well, in Georgia, I'm from Albany, Georgia, so we're almost connected. You lived in Albany at one point.
I did.
What I know what it's like in the South. What was it like growing up for you down there? And when did the coping mechanism start to happen? And what were those things that caused you to have a coping mechanism?
Right. Well, I think as I mentioned, just being a military family in itself, we lived in a small town in Georgia. We were the only military family. My dad was an Army recruiter, and he came there to be the recruiter and then went to Vietnam. And I think that, just being a military family in itself was different because, I wore a POW bracelet. My dad wasn't there. My dad was absent. And so, I remember being at school and not really necessarily knowing where I fit in.
Right.
I believe, I do have an older sister. My sister is 5 years older than I am. And I believe that, we were latchkey kids. We would come home from school, and the first thing I would do is go to the refrigerator. I mean, food was a comfort for me for a long time. And I think that, what was happening in our family was my dad was one of 9 kids. He was the son of a Baptist preacher. My grandmother was very strict, and but my dad was very strict. I mean,
Okay.
I grew up in a very fear-based home. I did things because I was afraid if I didn't, I would get in trouble. I believe my mom was very submissive in the same way. And, I do want to say, my dad passed away 5 years ago. My mom passed away this past year. And, it's ironically when I'm talking about my mom and dad, one thing I want to say is that so many people grow up. And I've heard clients say to me, I never felt loved as a child.
Right.
Despite anything in my household, I can unequivocally say I always felt loved. I always felt loved by my dad. I always felt loved by my mom. And
Even with the fear factors.
absolutely, because that's all. As a child, I just thought that was part of being a child. I
You
thought
thought that was the
everyone.
norm.
I thought it was the norm.
Okay.
I never knew. I thought the role of children was to be afraid of your parents. I mean,
Okay.
that's how I grew up. And another thing, though, was my dad was very strict and he had a very bad temper. He had like a trigger temper. He was known for that, and that he could lose his cool very quickly. And my mom was one who seemed to take most of the brunt of my dad's temper. It's funny. I was thinking last night about this and thinking about your show, Andre, and thinking about Andre the Beast. And I remember as a little girl lying in bed and having my hands up like a lion, like a beast coming after me. And I remember I'd make these sounds because I'd hear my mom and dad talking and fussing, and then I'd hear it start to escalate.
Right.
But I would use this like, sound, as crazy as it may sound. It was the beast that was keeping me where I didn't have to listen. It gave me something else to focus on to drown out, the yelling and the arguing. But I always kept one ear out to the very first time when I'd hear that hit and I'd know that my dad had hit my mom. And I would take off running in the room. And I remember many, many times I was the one who separated them. And so I think I learned early on that I had a responsibility to be a peacemaker. I had a responsibility to stop conflict,
Right.
that it was up to me to do that. And so as a small child, as a young child, having that kind of responsibility on you is a big one. But I think the other thing I learned is I learned that appearance was everything. For anyone on the outside world, they would think we were the picture perfect family.
How is that? How did that happen?
We went to Sunday school, we went to church. My mom and dad always made sure our needs were met. They always made sure we were dressed nice. I mean, my dad, looks and appearance were very important. I mean, he went from being an Army recruiter to being a car salesman and a car dealer and everything
Right.
that goes along with that. He always dressed very nice. My mom went to the beauty shop every week, that she had her hair teased. That's back when they used to wear the frosted and teased hair. And she, up until the day my mom passed away, at age 85, she was still going to the beauty shop once a week. And so there was a lot put into appearance and showing up looking a certain way. And I think that that's what, when I look at the development of my eating disorder, because I went from being binge eating to anorexia when I was in junior high school,
Hmm.
and then to bulimia when I was in high school. And I believe that for me, my eating disorder, because when I lost weight, everyone told me about how great I looked. No
Right.
one said, "Oh, I'm really worried about you." Everyone just complimented me. I got a lot of kudos. I had a boyfriend through high school, he was the football player, he was the good
Right.
looking guy. And now for the first time, I had a boyfriend. But as I said, eating disorders are biopsychosocial. So I know that genetic component was there. There was a lot of alcoholism in both sides of my family, both
Hold down one
maternal and
second,
paternal.
Julie. Let's go
Uh-huh.
back a minute. When you talk about the eating disorder and being the word
Psychosocial.
that you use, you mentioned everybody knew your dad as having the temper, and the mom being taking the blunt force and of the situation. What did you know a lot about about your mom and your dad? Because you mentioned a key component, genetic. Was any of this stuff did anybody on your mom and dad's side suffer from any of the things that you're about to go through? Because to me, it
Right.
seemed like that they would have recognized the eating, the syndrome of going to the ice box, the weight, and so forth. None of this was even brought up did they even notice, is what I'm saying.
Oh, they noticed. I mean, I was taken to the military doctor when I was in fourth grade because I needed to lose weight. I mean, doctors gave me when I was 9 years old, gave me diet pills.
Right.
So yeah, they noticed because I needed, people would say, "Oh, you've got such a pretty face," but as I was saying, both my mom and my dad came from addictive families, with alcoholism, obesity. I'm sure there were eating disorders there. I mean, again, keep in mind, I'm talking back in the Karen Carpenter days. People didn't know about eating disorders
And
then.
she
I mean,
died
these days,
from
yeah, she died from
this.
anorexia. And
Correct.
these days, everyone knows what an eating disorder is. Back in the late 1960s, early 70s, people didn't talk about eating disorders.
Right.
It's just what you did.
Right.
It's what you did to look a certain way. And so, I believe that, when you look at the genetic side, I always talk about it's like having the breeding ground. And I had the breeding ground. I have the genetics. I had psychologically, the things, the way I'm wired.
Right.
I am a perfectionist. I am a people pleaser. I am very much, I learned to be externally validated in my life. I grew up believing that the most important thing in the world was what other people thought about you.
Really.
And then socially, as I mentioned, I got a lot of kudos when I started losing weight. I mean, looking a certain way, I gained a lot of things. I was in the whole beauty contest thing and competed like in the Miss Georgia series. And, looking a certain way, being a certain way, how you presented was very important. And our society really, not unlike it is today. I mean, it's still the same.
Julie,
There is a lot given to that.
did your sister suffer from any of the? She's 5 years older. Did you see her going through any of this? Did you share with her
Well,
what you
my
was
my
going through?
yes, I mean my sister and I have had very different journeys, and where we are today is very different places.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been very fortunate in that I started working in mental health when I was 17 years old. And so I became aware of the importance of mental health and getting therapy for myself and
Right.
doing things. I've always been very open with talking about my mental health journey. My sister, and I, as I said, we had different journeys. I moved away when I was 19 years old. I moved to another city.
Hmm.
My sister still lives in the same place.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, it's really hard to compare our stories because I think we have both been impacted, but
Right.
how we've dealt with it has been very different.
What was three of the things that you think really impacted you? What we might call the triggers that set you off and then allowed you to say, okay, I need to, because you mentioned fear base. That's pretty key. There's a lot of things that you can put up under that category. You mentioned the validation. Elaborate a little bit more on the fear factors part of your life, the things that really shocked you, and more importantly, when you said something that was key. You start working in the mental field, but nobody was talking about this particular topic at that time. So who was the one that said, who diagnosed you? And then you said,
Well,
okay, this is something I need to start working on.
right. Well, I mean, the truth is no one diagnosed me. I worked in mental health. I mean, you actually kind of said the three things, I mean, growing up in a home where I did things out of fear versus my own internal core belief system.
Mm-hmm.
I made good grades because I was afraid if I didn't. I behaved in ways because I was afraid if I didn't, what the consequence would be. I think that, I watched both of my parents have very, very strong work ethics, and to the point that workaholism was just second nature in our family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember ever seeing my family rest. I mean, Saturdays were for work. Sundays we went to church and then we worked after. I mean, weekends were a time that we were always going, and sitting and resting and watching TV or relaxing was not something that was seen as a positive virtue in my family. Where you got the kudos was who was working the hardest, who was doing the most. It was about being a human doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, society was validating that as well. I got a lot of honors. I got a lot of awards because of all that I was doing and the way that I looked. And so I believe all of that contributed. Yes, I started working in mental health when I was 17. And again, I think that I believed that what I did, because it was so universally accepted, everyone was on a diet.
Right.
Everyone, would be doing things. So it wasn't like anyone ever said to me, Julie, do you realize the impact of this on your life?
Right.
No one ever said to me, Julie, do you realize that what you're putting your body through could impact your ability to be a mom one day? No one
Wow.
ever talked about
Never
that.
thought about that part.
No one ever talked about that. People only talked about how great I looked and how I'd lost so much weight and asked me how I did it. And so for me, it wasn't until I started working in mental health, and I had a boss who he passed away years later. But I remember one day, working in the mental health field, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about codependency. I learned a lot about mental health and depression and the impact. I attended a lot of workshops. I went through a lot of training. And what I learned through this is I became very self-aware. And I really do believe a gift that I have was, and something I still pride myself on, is self-awareness. I'm very much aware when I talk too much. I'm very much aware when I'm too intense. I'm very much aware of all these things, I don't deny it, and it's something years later I still work on. But I do believe that what happened, I was able to become aware that what I was doing was not healthy.
Wow.
And I did get into individual therapy. Then a couple of years later, this boss I was talking about, he had left, he had moved to Savannah, Georgia. And one day out of the blue, he just called me and he said, "So Julie, how's your eating disorder?"
Wow.
And I'm like, well, Joe, my eating disorder is great. And how are you? And what started this was a man who I still attribute one of two men in my life. Another was Dr. Bishop, who was the physician who trained me working in the eating disorder field.
Mm-hmm.
But these two men really were pivotal in the journey that I had in starting to work with eating disorders. And So I started working in eating disorders when I was 21. I had moved to Savannah, Georgia. I helped to start an eating disorder program. Um, During that time, though, I would still say that I was in recovery. I would never say I was recovered. And I truly believe that it was just like any other, compulsion that I was always in the process of. And what I realized years later, it took me having a baby. I was 40 years old when I had my child, my little girl, and who's now not so little, she's 22 now. But, what I realized was that, um, you know, I was still engaging in certain things, um, not necessarily engaging in an eating disorder, but some eating disordered thoughts and behaviors, oh, I need to lose weight. Oh, I need to do this, and truly not appreciating my body
Right.
for what it was made for. And it was after I had a baby and all that I went through to have a baby, because that was one of the impacts for me. One of the impacts was that I went through fertility treatment, tried many times, had several miscarriages, had several, very early on. I went through artificial insemination, and finally I went through 2 in vitros to finally have my baby. And what I realized, all the years of abuse that I had done to my body, I was so focused on looking a certain way that it was in fact keeping me from reaching the goal that I had of having a family, of having a baby. And after being pregnant and having my daughter, it made me really truly understand the beauty of our bodies and how miraculous they are, and how important it is, how very, very important it is to really take care of ourselves.
Julie, let me ask you a question. Let's go back a minute. And thanks for coming on and sharing this information about eating disorder. A few questions. I want to go back a little bit. When you say an eating disorder, I'm trying to take my mind into a person that may not know the dysfunctions that happen here. What's a day like for you with this particular situation? Do you come in the house, like when I hear eating disorder, are you just grabbing cookies and pop and
I think that's the myth. That's the myth.
That's what I mean. What is actually is it for you before you was diagnosed with it? What were some of the behaviors that you were doing?
Well, some of the behavior, they differed according to when I was in life. As a very small child, I would never eat during the day because I didn't want people to see me eat. I felt very ashamed of eating. I would come home in the afternoon, come home when no one could see me, and I would binge eat.
Right.
I remember in my family, we ate very large helpings. I never knew that a sirloin steak was for a family. My mom would make a sirloin. We had, my mom and dad would like buy cows, and so we had lots of meat in the freezer. I never knew that eating 5 or 6 pieces of fried chicken was not a serving size. I didn't learn what a serving size was, and I didn't know how to identify satiety. I just knew I found comfort in eating. And later in life, it was very different. Andre, later in life, I felt comfort by not allowing myself to eat, by feeling hunger, by going to bed and hearing my stomach growl, by never, ever letting anyone see me eat anything, my family or anyone else. And if I did eat, it was very low calorie foods. Something else that I think is really important is that later in life, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And what I realized is that when I was taking Black Beauty's speed, I felt normal for the first time in my life.
Really?
And I realized later it's because it was amphetamines. Of course I felt normal because I had ADHD. And so for the first time, I could really focus. But I then did it like I did everything else. I went overboard. I was living off of Tab. We drank Tab during that time. That was the big drink was Tab. I know, right? So we would drink, that was our drink. And I lived off soft drinks. I lived off amphetamines. I didn't eat. And I got a lot of kudos. Now,
Julie,
later in life,
hold on one second, Julie. I'm gonna ask one
uh-huh.
more question to still go on the flow. During this time, your transition, um, when you have this particular illness, I know it may differ from different people, but did you have certain foods and stuff? Because you mentioned tab. So through this journey, as you're going through recovery and trying to sort it out, because nobody talked about it, did you go through different phases of foods and beverages?
The truth is, yeah,
It's a
Andre,
myth,
it's not
right?
about the food. Yeah, it's not about the food. It's about, there's something I use, and I use this in working with clients, and this may help to understand. There's 4 ways that we can deal with anything in our life. And so, say, for example, we have expectations, realities here. There's this gap in between.
Mm-hmm.
We have 4 ways that we can close that gap, so to speak, in our life. Expected that my parents wouldn't fight. My parents fought. Expecting that I would be able to have a baby at age 25. I didn't. There was a gap there. There's 4 ways: too unhealthy, too healthy. The too unhealthy is one, I can get into addictions and compulsions. And what they do is they work for the moment. They numb out that feeling for the moment. They give me comfort for the moment, but then that wears off and I'm right back. The difference is now I'm feeling shame. Before I had this gap, now not only do I have the gap, I'm feeling ashamed. The other unhealthy thing is I can get into the if onlys. This is where people become suicidal. They become depressed. If only I were dead. If only I had this. If only I were thin. If only I had a boyfriend. It's all that mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get caught up in that mythology, but once again, it doesn't help to close that gap.
Mm.
Too healthy, or one, physically, what can I do? What is it that I can do? What can I do to close this gap? I can use my words. I can physically do something different. I can take myself out of situations. I can speak up. I can exercise. I can see a dietitian. I can eat healthy. Sometimes, though, we have done every single thing in our power, everything we know that we can do physically. And that's when the 4th thing comes up. It's acceptance. The truth is, something I was going to say is I always wanted to be 5'7" and weigh 110 pounds. Okay. Unrealistic because I'm 5'5"
Right.
on a good day. And so therefore I was already setting myself up with an unrealistic expectation that I could never live up to because it was unrealistic. I was comparing myself to things that were not comparable.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned before we have to wrap up, and I really want to shed some beautiful light, because like we said, there is beauty at the end of this. You recognize that there was a problem in the nick of time. You wind up, because it was it was crippling your ability to have a child. And that was one of the things that basically you wanted from the get-go.
Right.
But take us down that journey a little bit, and the beauty that came from understanding and how to deal with the eating disorder, and how recognizing it at an early point in your life enabled you to have this beautiful daughter. Tell the viewers a little bit about that story.
Yeah. So, when I was able to have my daughter, I mean, I'll never forget, we were living in Bermuda at the time. So life looked very different, living in another country. But I remember the moment they handed my daughter to me, none of that other stuff mattered, and I remember thinking, I am going to teach my daughter that there is a different way of living life, and there were certain things that I meant, that I wanted her to know about.
Mm.
And she and I have our favorite saying is a Maya Angelou, you may not remember what people said or what they did, but you always remember how they made you feel. And something I've really tried to strive to teach my daughter is about loving kindness. First, loving kindness to yourself, and making sure that everything you're doing is aligned with that value. And then loving kindness to others. We never know what other people are going through. You
Right.
know, that person who's cutting us off in traffic, we don't know what they're dealing with.
Right.
And so I've always, the other thing is I wanted my daughter to know to not make decisions in her life out of fear, that I was going to love her regardless, but to make decisions that were aligned with her core values,
Right.
and that they're her core values, not my core values,
Right.
that they're her core values.
Right. With that said, I'm going to go back a little bit. And congratulations on having a child,
Thank you.
addressing the fact that you did have an eating disorder. Sorry for the loss of your father, January the 27th, and the recent loss of your mom. I know that's still weighing on you, but I'm going to go back a minute. You're now in a profession to help people deal with the different phases of eating disorder. How many people from the moment that it was the silent illness to now people are coming out? Are you seeing more of it on the female side? Are you seeing more of it on the male side? Is it more teenage girls? What's the demographics now?
Oh no, eating disorders are not picky. Eating disorders impacts very young, very old. I've treated as young as 5. I've treated as old as 87. I've treated males, females, transgender. I've treated all. I mean, eating disorders are not picky about who they impact. So, anyone can be impacted by an eating disorder.
What are some of the things that you could share with the viewers that they need to look out for with maybe somebody in their family? Because clearly it was called the unseen illness when you had it. So as a professional, what are some of the things that me as a parent or the viewers as a parent need to look out for and say, oh, well, you're showing signs. I might need to get you some help?
Well, I think the thing that is a misconception are that eating disorders can be identified by body size. I know, you cannot identify an eating disorder by a body size. It is more about the behaviors, keeping in mind what I talked about, biopsychosocial,
Explain that real quick. Explain that real quick so the viewers can understand that.
Biopsychosocial. So bio is the biological, the genetic. Psycho is the psychological. It's, low self-esteem, depression, obsessiveness. And then societal is society's impact, our society's impact on,
Social media, television,
social media,
commercials.
the comparison. I mean, now our newest thing now is leggings legs, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's always something new. And years ago, I was 21 years old, and I remember thinking, I am going to make a difference. And I hope I have made a difference in some people's lives. But what I know is that this way of being, this over focus on how we look, is not something that's just going to go away easily. And it's where, I encourage people, not only do we look at people in our family and think, okay, something's going on with this individual, and it's usually about their behaviors versus how they look, but also what are the things we're doing to attribute to that? I mean, what kind of comments are we making ourselves?
How can the viewers reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing? As a matter of fact, why don't you tell us real quickly exactly what are you doing? Because we almost missed this. You guys are doing something remarkable that you don't have to live in Georgia to be a part of.
So I am now, even though I still, of course, have a passion and I have ways of focusing on eating disorders, a company I'm working with is Immersion Intensives. And Immersions Intensives really taps into my passion for increasing access to care to individuals who are struggling with mental health issues of all kinds. And with Immersion Intensives, we are creating, most places create something and then want people to come. We are here to listen to what the issues are that people are struggling with, and we build intensives around that. What I mean by intensives, these are 3, 5, 7, 10-day retreats. We're able to offer them across the country. We work with our clinical leaders who have expertise in different areas. Our first one we did was called Inner Warrior, and it was looking at trauma in the workplace for executive women. What's really cool about this model is not only the flexibility of where we have it, but it's also the model that we work from. We believe in using nature excursions. Nutrition is very important, so we have an in-house chef, and then working with the clinical leaders who put together both expressive therapies and, utilizing traditional therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, ACT, all of these different therapies in order to fully immerse these individuals in a very short time and help create change. It's very, very exciting.
Now, Julie, we know that there is not a price on your mental health, but I do have to put my mind in the state of the viewers. Is this affordable? Is there financing? Is it covered by health insurance? How's that work?
That's part of our flexible model, that we want to create a model that's based, that we can have flexibility around it. So it's based on how many people are in the cohort, where it's located. So like, for example, if it's located in a high-end luxury home, the price may be a little bit more.
Okay.
We are not covered by insurance at this point in time. I mean, our hope and dream is that one day that insurance companies will recognize intensive as a level of care. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people's health plans at work, their FSA plan, their health care savings plans will help to pay for the cost, but the costs are a range. I mean, and again, we create these based on the needs of the individual.
How can they get in contact with you? Is there a website, phone number?
Yes, there's a website and a phone. The phone number is 615-345-9514. Or our website is immersionintensives.com. I want to make sure I tell people this is immersion. It's coming out of with an E, not immersion with an I. So it's immersions, immersionintensives.com.
They can't get that wrong.
I spelled that very clearly. Yeah. So,
you know what? Thank you so much, Julie, for coming on and sharing such an impactful story. You definitely have that beast frame of mind. I'm speechless almost. You have a beautiful daughter now. Your wishes come true, which goes to show that if you keep on the path, even though you've been dealt some stumbling blocks, you knew what your end of the destination was going to be, and that was to be a mother. You have a child. You're now giving back with teaching a silent treatment that people didn't even know about. But now you guys have the treatment with this new program you got out. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.